Hello friends, here we are for our second video enjoy assignment for the Stairway to Gold Leadership Bootcamp. So on where we go, right? I would like to continue the discussion that we're having about leadership, and I would like to talk about leadership on a continuum, what that is on a continuum. So because, probably hear me say this a lot during this month, that contrast creates clarity. So sometimes I'm going to make some and sometimes within the business, it's really important and helpful to make very sort of black and white distinctions between things. If you follow Abraham Hicks, that's really the idea of contrast, right? And the reason we create and have contrast in this world is it helps give us clarity. We see this, that we can make a decision whether we do or not want that, and then we can create something else. So contrast is a very positive concept. So what I'm going to do with leadership is I'm going to break it down into two, right, just for the sake of this discussion, two very distinct leadership styles. And I'm doing that not because there aren't any other styles or because one's right or wrong, just because I want to make a very clear contrast so that we can look at it and learn from it, okay? So I'm going to split leadership into what I'm going to call, and this might be backwards. If it is, I'm going to post this on the group too. But so I'm going to split it into the type of leader that's a merger and the type of leader that's the individualizer. And again, knowing that leadership is really on a spectrum, right? So you might be anywhere in between these two, or you might be on the very extreme side. Again, no good, bad, right, or wrong. We're just going to look at this for the sake of discussion. So just to let you know what these are about, the type of leader that's a merger, and I kind of subtitled that the Borg, right? It's the type of leader where you want everybody to be together, just one big happy family. It's sort of the opposite of individualizing. It's merging, the Borg. And that is a Star Wars reference where everyone's connected into each other. And by the way, we all are. But again, for the sake of this discussion, with the merger, it's very important to them. They're constantly merging with everybody. And that's where they feel best and where they feel safe. And so they merge with everyone. It feels good for them everyone to kind of be on the same page and think alike, maybe. And it's this whole concept of all for one and one for all, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the individualizer. And I have subtitled that the Lone Ranger. More of the Lone Ranger, more of the I got this leader, right? And again, if I personally put myself on this spectrum, I would say that more often I would go on the individualizer side, and sometimes I can be extreme individualizer. We're going to talk about that. But also I can go on the merger side, this whole idea of community. And I do that too. But what we're going to talk about is the value of both of those, the shadow side of both of those, and the continuum and the flow space we can be in between these two types of leadership, because they both can be beneficial, right? So the first thing I'd like you to do while you're watching this video with me is just ask yourself, where are you on the spectrum? Do you feel like you're more of an extreme, one or the other in this moment? And so again, for the sake of contrast and clarity, let's just go right to this moment. And just first thing that comes to your mind, are you more of a merger or an individualizer? And again, this is for information, not, rather than for determining right or wrong. There is no right or wrong between these two. So just go ahead and name it quick. And then I want you to ask yourself, how does that serve you, right? How does it serve you to be, say, a merger or an individualizer? And maybe right now, maybe put yourself on one of the extremes rather than the spectrum right now, just so we can look at it. So if you're more one side or the other, how does it serve you to be in that space? And then I want you to think about, in this moment, are there any spaces within that side that you're on where this holds you back, where being that type of a leader might hold you back? Right? And hopefully you have your journal and a pen with you and you can jot down some thoughts on that right now. Okay? So something that could hold you back as a leader in leadership is the inability to synthesize realizations to affect change. And the image that I got in meditation, actually, again, the middle of the night realization that I got, sort of Spirit gave me this visual so that we could understand it better, is this idea of gluten intolerance. And if you break gluten intolerance down, you know, gluten is a protein. And proteins are building blocks. They're building blocks. They're the very foundation of us. And what we use for information gathering, for building our bodies, our cells, all of that, okay? And building blocks are used to synthesize concepts and change. And so if we have a gluten intolerance, say, or within this business or within ourselves, we have an inability to synthesize realizations to affect change, then we're sort of breaking down that process by which we can have these building blocks to be able to continually create, right? Think of your body. Your body's always creating new cells, and old cells are always dying off. You are literally never the same person from one moment to the next. Let that sink in. Whatever you believe in your mind, the truth is that you are never literally the same person from one moment to the next. And so if we, in our leadership, have an inability to synthesize this relationship, and what is synthesize? Synthesize as a leader is when you are able to look, for example, look at yourself as the merger or the individualizer, and rather immediately going to, oh, well, you know, being a merger is wrong, or being an individualizer is wrong. We should be, you know, and having this concept of you have to be like this perfect leader and decide what that means, what that looks like. That sort of breaks down that process of being able to synthesize, because as a leader, we need to be able to constantly have the ability to be synthesizing information. This whole concept that I talked to you about, plan, do, review, is part of synthesizing at the most basic level. So if we can plan something and then do it and then review it, see what didn't work, what did work, and change, then we are in a space of leadership, because leaders are affecting change in a really big way, right? If you look at the concept of leadership as a whole, what are leaders doing? They are blazing a trail. They are blazing a trail of change. They are on the path of more resistance. They are on the path less traveled. And so as a leader, you need to have this ability to constantly synthesize information. Something's coming at you over here, and from a leader and from a team member. This class isn't working. This enrollment isn't working. All of these pieces, this is working. This is going great. And rather than sort of landing on any of those things in any given time and sort of like planting on it and getting a little bit stuck, a leader is constantly synthesizing these things, right? And if you have the equivalent of a gluten intolerance and you can't do that, then you're not going to have the building blocks to constantly affect change and growth, right? Remember the cell. Remember you're never the same person one moment to the next. So we want our leadership to be like that, right? So the individualizer, I told you that I think that I most often reside more in this space. You know, I'm naturally an introvert, bit of a control freak. I'm a Capricorn. I create in solitude. I absolutely create in solitude, right? So that's how that serves me. That's how being an individualizer actually serves me. Remember, I asked you to ask that question because as an individual, individualizing myself, separating myself from the group at times allows me to stay in that creation space that we talked about last time, because I create in solitude. Also being an empath, when I'm in a group all of the time, when I have to be, if I'm constantly merging, if I went over into this merger space, right, and I never went over into this space, then that's too much static and noise for me, right? That's like too much input. And so I can't hear myself think, so to speak, and it's hard for me to create and be individual. The individualizer is, again, sort of constantly blazing a trail, right, of new. The idea that there's nothing new under the sun is absolutely true. On a certain plane, everything's been done already. Everything's been thought of, created, and you might say that we as creators and leaders are at times just tapping into what's already there, tapping into the brain, taking pieces out of the vortex or pieces out of the plane of possibilities and adding that into our tool belt or our understanding. It's not very often that someone is developing or bringing forth in this world something that is completely, absolutely, and utterly new. Although, once in a while that happens. But the individualizer can take all of that information and make it new to them, apply it to themselves and their situation. And so in that sense, it is new information, okay? This is why if you go to the bookstore and check and go and buy all the books on leadership or being a leader, there's probably 1 million of them, and there's 1 million ideas about what that is. And so in this month that we're spending together, for example, I'm doing a lot of individualizing. I'm downloading information. I'm tapping into what you all need. I'm forcing myself, which is a little out of my comfort zone, you can imagine, being the control freak, of bringing in the information that is specific to what you all need right now and making it applicable to you and to us. Rather than, we could go do a study on what everyone else says about leadership, and there's a time and space for that sort of merger space, and we can learn from that. The 12-week year and the laws of leadership, we're learning from that. But you see what I mean? The individualizer is more like blazing their own trail. Possibly the individualizer could go so extreme on that path that maybe a little bit of a shadow side of that would be that they would be the ones, you probably have them on your team, that were like, I'm just going to do it my own way, which sometimes can be code for they're not teachable. So perhaps an extreme version of individualizing would be in a state of being unteachable or stubborn or sort of ego-based, and that I can do this myself, thinking that I've got to keep myself individualized because I don't want to become a robot, right? I got to be individual. And so sometimes those type of people are resistant to learning, resistant to a system, resistant, they want to reinvent the wheel. And possibly the shadow side of a merger would be, they're not staying ahead of the creation process and what their team needs, because they're sort of keeping the team together. It's sort of like the idea of in public schools, oftentimes the kids, there's not a lot of brilliance coming out of the public school system right now because they're all sort of corralled into this mediocre space of, you don't want to rise up too much. You don't want to be less, everybody just kind of stay in the same space. And so potentially an extreme merger space might keep people from rising up as individuals. Okay. So anyway, if we have that ability to synthesize realizations, we allow ourselves, rather than even looking at this chart, making it right or wrong, we allow ourselves to see even the extremes and to look at ourselves and see, I'm getting a little extreme on that, and what is the benefit of that, and what is the not benefit of that? And we have the ability to create some more building blocks of something, continually reinvent ourselves. If we don't have a gluten intolerance, if we have the ability to look at ourselves and look at our teams in a fresh way every day without judgment so that we can continue to move forward, okay? So you might say that a process to improve your leadership or to improve your skills or improve your team or to improve your rate of rank advancement would be to avoid blocking, okay? Like we spoke of. Blocking would be fear-based, and it would be the concept of, the actual fear is fear of doing it wrong or fear of failure. So if that subconscious thing is speaking too loudly for you, that fear of failure, afraid that you're doing it wrong, when information or teaching is coming to you, if automatically that triggers, you go into a trigger of, oh, they're telling me I'm wrong, or oh, I feel like I'm doing it wrong. What you're actually doing is you're blocking yourself. You've created the equivalent of a gluten intolerance. You've blocked yourself from the ability to just look at it, not from a right or wrong space, just look at it and go, how could I use that? How could I synthesize that information, put that into my building blocks to improve even more, right? So by being afraid of looking at something because we fear that we did it wrong, we lose the opportunity to synthesize that information to affect positive growth. That makes sense. So we're basically talking about avoidance patterns, and we all have them, guys. We all have avoidance patterns. And I like to look at the chakras, and I know a lot of you in this group are yogis. You know about the chakras. If you don't, they're energy centers within the body. They correspond to the 7 chakras within the body, and you can literally see avoidance patterns within the body. The body, remember I said the body is never the same from one moment to the next. It's always recreating itself, and even the shape of your body will give information about ways that you are in an avoidance pattern, okay? So there's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 avoidance patterns related to the chakras. And I'm taking this from the book Eastern Body, Western Mind by Anodia Judith, which is kind of like the chakra guru. And I'm just going to briefly tell you about them. So the schizoid creative type of avoidance pattern, they tend to be, if you look at them in terms of their body, they tend to be really, really thin, sort of sinewy and thin. They're very creative and intelligent with their upper chakras overdeveloped. In other words, their connection to the divine, their intuition, their spiritual, their spiritual life is like overdeveloped. And their issues center around the right to exist. Okay, so it's about the root chakra and the right to exist. So when we look at it as an avoidance pattern, they have this fear, right, that they don't even have the right to exist. And of course, this is subconscious. And so definitely they're going to trigger on anything that makes them feel like they don't deserve or they're wrong about something, okay? And then we have the oral character or the lover, and that body shape is kind of like slumped with shoulders forward. And this type of person is really a second chakra issue, and it comes from a deprivation in the nurturing and nourishment stage of dependency related to the first and second chakra, survival and emotions. And they're strongly oriented toward emotional merging, okay? So this type of person is going to definitely be on the merging side of the leadership spectrum, merging and giving, and they're referred to as lovers. And then the masochist or endurer, they tend to be thick physically in the middle, just kind of like solid. And their structure is fixated at chakra 3, or the solar plexus, and the will. Their energy is sort of bound at the will. And they're a bit robbed of their autonomy. They hold everything inside in conflicting patterns of pleasing and resisting. They turn their blocked energy inward against themselves. They're strong and loyal, and they can endure difficulty well, okay? So their avoidance pattern, right? If we're looking at this in an avoidance pattern, again, they're resisting. They're turning everything on themselves, making themselves wrong, and all of their energy is bound in this will center, in this control center, right? And then we have the rigid achiever, and just like you would imagine, if you looked at them physically, they're just very rigid, you know, they stand very rigid. They carry themselves that way, right? And the reason they do this, the avoidance pattern, is that they're wounded at the heart by lack of approval. So their avoidance pattern is they get triggered when they look at something that they might label wrong. They get triggered because they're constantly seeking approval, right? And to them, that translates as not getting approval, right? So they focus their energy on achievement, lots of achievement. I can see myself in every single one of these, by the way. They're highly functional, but they're often afraid of relationships, commitment, and feelings of intimacy, okay? Then the hysteric person, they tend to be like that pear shape, bigger on the bottom physically. They're kind of like the combination of the rigid achiever, and they tend to occur more often in women, and we're all women here, so we might be this. And they have more cultural permission to be emotional, so they're going to tend just to be more emotional in nature. The wounds and patterns are quite similar to the achiever, but where the emotions are initially held back, they later erupt with an intensity that gives this structure its name, right? So, just laughing because I've totally done this. So, you know, you're holding your emotions in, and you just keep holding them in and in and in. You have this high tolerance for people and situations. You hold them in, and then eventually you just kind of like, bleh, you kind of just like erupt in emotion because you just can't take it anymore because you've just been pushed too far, right? Sort of like that. And so this avoidance pattern in the business or in leadership might be that they're constantly avoiding anything that brings up an emotional trigger in them, in their team, in their leadership, or in something they see in themselves. They just keep avoiding, and then eventually they have just this emotional eruption where they're like, you know, either crying or they're angry or whatever about things, okay? And then we have the psychopath, challenger, defender. That person's like this, you know, defender kind of physically. Let's see, related to the third chakra, again, the will, but the result is excessive rather than deficient. So they're more like power over others. And they defend the meek and challenge the strong. And since their holding pattern brings energy upward in the body, specifically to the neck and the shoulders, it's related to the fifth chakra, okay? So just in case, I just bring this up just in case, you know, chakras and yogic ideas is something that really speaks to you. You could check this out. Here's a picture of the different body shapes, by the way, if you can see it. Okay, and sort of avoiding patterns in the chakras. Okay, and all of this is just for information, not to judge ourselves. Remember we talked about in the last video, the better we know ourselves, the better leader that we are. So this is all really valuable. So it's not so much that there is a best way or the way to be a leader. Specifically today, as we're talking about the merger or the individualizer, it's not so much that, you know, one's right and one's wrong, as we want to get a space in our leadership that we're being conscious and intentional in our leadership rather than reactionary, thus the avoiding patterns, right? So the way that we are able to be more conscious and intentional in our leadership is if we allow ourselves to look at ourselves, so look at things. So rather than make ourselves wrong or right about something specifically wrong, that we can just look at it always with the eye of improving, okay? And that we can be conscious. Because in truth, there's going to be times when being more of a merger leader is going to really serve you in that circumstance. And there's going to be times when being an individualizer is really going to serve you. So you want to be able to be fluid, right? And that's being a conscious leader. The ability to be fluid rather than being one of these out of an avoidance pattern, if that makes sense, okay? So why do we choose that space or stance of there needing to be a right or wrong kind of leader or a right or wrong kind of way of doing your business? Well, there's about 5 ways that I've marked down spaces that they can come from: religious upbringing, parental discipline styles, society's input, and authority figures in our life, okay? So we're going to do a really brief meditation again right now. So if you can just get yourself in a comfortable seated position with your feet on the floor. This is going to be a lot shorter than the last one. It's just a short meditation, but just take a moment to send your awareness and your energy inside. Notice your breathing. Allow yourself to do some belly breathing where your inhales inflate the belly slowly and your exhales, your belly button gently goes inward. On the exhale, feel your feet on the floor. Feel yourself in your body, okay? Now I want you to allow yourself to open, allow to come to your mind, receive this information. As I, again, read through these 5 ways that this needing to be right or wrong, or labeling everything right or wrong, where this comes from, as I say the phrase, allow yourself to receive where that might be within you. Maybe you'll see a person in your past, a circumstance, a color, a feeling, a word, whatever that is, right? So in your religious upbringing, if you had a religious upbringing, maybe what comes to mind is a sermon that you heard, or the space when you were a child. What's coming to me right now is when I was a child in children's church, and the teacher told us that if we told a lie and then we left church and went to cross the street and were hit by a car, that we would go to hell, right? Which creates that extreme need to figure out what's right and what's wrong. So is there anything within your religious upbringing that's coming forward now? Just notice it. Keep breathing, keep breathing. Okay, now how about in your parental, as in your parents, their parental discipline style with you? Did that create, or any moments coming up, any scenes arising for you? You can see that pattern was created within you, fear-based pattern. Punishment styles, perhaps. Allow yourself to see that, be with that. If it's bringing up emotion, just keep breathing and be with it. Be with it. Okay, how about society's input? How about us as women? What we're taught in our media. Allow yourself just to go there, right? What all those signals, all those messages, subliminally and otherwise, that you're picking up from other moms, from TV, from media, from radio, just in speaking to each other, all those messages that might be contributing to any fear-based spaces of right and wrong, black and white. And then finally, authority figures. That would be teachers, pastors, Sunday school teachers, police officers, court judges, presidents, congressmen, doctors, lawyers, any authority bosses, all of those, all of that, anything that wants to come up around authority figures. You developed a fixed energy kink within you because of a something that was said to you by an authority figure, something that you observed an authority figure say or do, a scene with you and them. All of that, that, and that. And I'm just going to do a clearing statement here, and you don't need to understand the clearing statement. Just going to help us clear all of this. All of this times a gazillion that we have allowed to come forward within us, that we are now ready to release. And just pause for a moment and ask within yourself, what percentage of this, of all that came up, what percentage of this, how much of it am I in this now moment willing and ready to let go of? Not making that right or wrong, doesn't matter, whatever percentage comes up. So that percentage, that's what we're going to let go right now. Okay, times a gazillion. Good, bad, right, wrong, pod, poc, all nine shorts, boys and beyonds. Big inhale. Slow exhale. Releasing those patterns and those scenes. And as we release those scenes, we're releasing the negative impact that it had on our belief systems, in the sense that it may be holding us back in our business, but we're retaining what we are learning in this moment from those scenes, so that we can synthesize those things. Now that they no longer have a hold on us, they're no longer an energy kink within us, we can actually look at them, synthesize that information, allow it in to ourselves and to our being, to affect positive change and growth. Amen. Yum, yum. Okay, now bring in that gold frequency heart burst at the heart center right now of leadership. Remember, I'm going to get really used to that gold frequency. And in this gold frequency heart space, we're allowing all of that to synthesize. It's almost like boop, 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 boop. New patterns, new files are being filed within you, all to your benefit. You can open those files up and use them at any time without the triggers. Amen to that. Yes? Awesome. Okay, you can open your eyes. So you can do this, again, you can do this meditation during your morning miracle. What I would like you to explore with it is, what does synthesizing look like? What does synthesizing feel like? What is that? Rather than me just completely create a solid fixed definition around what I'm talking about, because it's really a concept that downloaded to me, I want you to synthesize what synthesizing is, right? Sit in that gold heart space of the frequency of leadership and look at synthesizing. What does that feel like? What does that look like? Okay, so we can upgrade our leadership, right? So we're going to create new stories around all of that in the gold heart space frequency, right? So be sure to write down, whatever scenes came up for you around religious, parental, society, and authority. Create new stories around those. In other words, in order to synthesize and not make even the scenes that we just cleared wrong, we can look at the religious upbringing scene, for example. We can say, well, how does that serve me? What can I pull from that to put into my leadership as something to change and transform? Whatever that is, right? Whatever that is, create a new story around that. Create a new story around parental disciplining. And what is that? Because honestly, guys, as a leader with a team, and the bigger your team gets, at least for me, the more and more and more I see the similarities between leading a team and parenting. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, right? So maybe whatever has been brought into your subconscious space around parenting and discipline, perhaps you're bringing into your team, right? So what positive stories do you want to create around that? Not avoidance patterns, positive stories in society and authority. What do we want? How do we want to reframe authority to be positive rather than avoiding it as a negative? Yes? Okay. So the difference between fluid leadership and ego-based or fixed leadership, which fixed and ego-based leadership, we're just doing, I think we've figured out by now, we're just doing that to protect ourselves, right? And again, we don't want to make that wrong. We don't want to make the ego wrong. The ego's there to protect you. Yay, ego. It has its place and has served us. What we want to do, though, is get more into a fluid space of leadership, because we have the new understanding that we don't need to protect ourselves. We can synthesize everything and be in a real high frequency leadership gold heart space that allows us to be fluid, so that if we need to go more towards the merging side, all for one and one for all, community, yes. If we need to be more individualized for certain things, more of the Lone Ranger, more of the I've got this do space on your own, that's great. You can do that. You can be fluid circumstantially with wherever you need to be, because we haven't made either of these wrong, right? They all have positive aspects, okay? So let's talk about the shadow side, okay? Not the wrong, but the shadow side of these two spaces. If we're looking at that individualizer, or the merger, the shadow side of being a merger is we might be in that merger space more because we have a fear of standing out or being or doing alone, right? That might be the shadow side. So you just want to examine that. You just want to know yourself. You want to go within, do a meditation. If you see yourself more on the merger side, you just want to go within and clean up any spaces within yourself that's being a merger out of fear of standing out. And by standing out, I mean some people have a fear of excelling, right? They want to merge with everyone on their team. They don't want to go forward too fast because they don't want these people to feel bad. And they hold themselves back with their leaders, waiting for them to catch up because they actually have a fear of standing out. They don't want them to feel less. So that's sort of like the fear of their own success space, right? So we just want to clean that up. We want to be in a merger space for the positive aspects that we talked about, for the community and the yummy spaces that it creates. So ironically, if we're doing it out of that fear space, we end up doing it alone if this fear is present. In other words, if you're doing it out of fear space, what you'll find is the very thing you fear happens. Like you find yourself alone. You find your leaders are like crickets, right? You're wanting them to be helping you, and you're getting the opposite. You want to do it together, and you're getting the opposite. Okay? You can also experience emotional entanglement with your team and leaders. Too much emotional entanglement, too much personal involvement, rather than business focus, can happen in the shadow side of merging. Okay? In the shadow side of the individualizer, you can have this fear of loss or control or responsibility. Maybe you're individualizing to an extreme because of fear of loss of control or that responsibility piece. And ironically, too much of a Lone Ranger, and you begin to bear the weight of others' lack. Okay? So what's really interesting is that you can see that the shadow side of both of these spaces can look really similar. They're sort of like two sides of the same coin. It's fascinating. Okay? And doing it all for everyone, if you're an individualizer and you're doing it in that more shadow space, you're maybe doing it all for everyone, and you might see a lack of duplication in your leadership. So rather than others rising in leadership below you, it doesn't duplicate, right? It just doesn't duplicate, and that slows you down, right? So, and we can be both, right? We can have the light side and the shadow side of all of these. And all of this is just for the purpose of looking at it, not for being right or wrong. And we can be both the merger and the individualizer. And there's times when I am operating within both of those spaces at once, which is awesome synthesizing. There are times when I'm way over on the individualizer. There are times when I'm way over on the merger. And none of those are wrong. We just want to be conscious and intentional about all of them. Okay? The strength, to end on a positive note, the strength side of a merger is team, culture, and community. The strength side of an individualizer is a powerful CEO of their company. They're free to fly at their own pace, and they have the ability to do a lot of internal work. They're more internal focused, whereas the merger can get kind of like enmeshed in other people, right? So strengths of both of them are positive, right? Okay, so now let's go to the assignment. So 3-part assignment. So there are 5 oil protocols to choose from already that I've given you, and I want you just to choose one of the 5 to use for this assignment. So I always want you to be using oils to assist you. We're doing a lot of work here, a lot of clearing, and I want you to use the oils to assist that process, to speed it up and make it easier. So we've got the I See Brilliance protocol that I gave you. You've got the Clear the Forest protocol, the Know Who You Are protocol, Improve Yourself protocol, and Make Connections protocol. And you can always go back to the last video if you don't know what each of those are. I know, Elizabeth, that you combined all 3 of those last ones, the Know Yourself, Improve Yourself, and Make Connections, which is awesome. So maybe you're using that, okay? I just want you to pick a protocol to use and let us know which one you used for this assignment. I also want you to do page 1 and 2, complete page 1 and 2 of the 12-week year workbook. And you can just take a pic of page 1 and 2 and share it in a comment below this video. Just kind of take it from a distance because we don't need to see your answers, right? In case someone doesn't have it done yet, just to know that you got it done. And then we want to hear any insights, though, after doing that assignment, any insights that you got from that. And then I want you to write the answers to these following questions in your journal during your miracle morning, or, you could just do it for the space and time that you blocked out for your assignment time, right? But it's great to do in your journaling time. So here's the questions. If I constantly make myself right or wrong at something, we've all done or do, so just allow yourself, don't overthink this. Just go with it. Lean into it. If I'm making myself right or wrong, what am I avoiding facing or feeling? That's an avoidance pattern. We've already determined that. So what is it that I'm avoiding? I'm avoiding facing something. I'm avoiding feeling something. What is that? Often it's the first thing that comes to your mind, guys, when you're writing. Or you can do automatic writing. You can just write down the question and then put your pen down on the paper and just start writing, and it'll come out. It'll just come out. So just avoid overthinking this. The next question, how does that retard or slow my growth? How is that retarded or slowed down my growth in my business? What am I getting out of that pattern? Because what are you literally getting out of that pattern? Because none of us do anything that we don't get something out of. Now, sometimes we're doing it out of a negative gain, not consciously, but it might be a negative gain, but it's still a gain. You're getting something out of doing that, okay? And I want you to write that down. What am I getting out of that pattern of making myself right or wrong? And then what is the price I pay for self-synthesizing intolerance? What is the price I pay? And finally, what does doing something wrong represent from childhood trauma or belief system? And that you can pull from that meditation that we did for that one, right?